Hey, everybody. I know we had some technical challenges last week. I'm terribly sorry about that. So, if you can't hear me, or if you can't see me, or if anything goes a little bit wonky, please do yell at me in the chat. Yeah. Today, we're going to be doing some CSS Grid, and I always say I'm exceptionally excited. It makes me sound like a liar. I am, of course, there we are, of course, exceptionally excited. There we are. Makes it a default. To be looking at CSS Grid with you today, and I'm excited about it because I'm genuinely terrible at CSS Grid. So I'd really, really love folks to follow along, and please fuss at me if and when you see a mistake, because I will absolutely make a mistake. I'll make a bunch of mistakes. So we talked last week. If you were here with us last week, that's amazing. If you weren't, also not a problem. We talked last week about Flexbox. And what CSS Flexbox does is it's a model, really a mental model that we apply to our CSS using some really specific commands. And what we're going to be learning about today is another sort of mental model we can apply to our CSS, where we've got specific commands, specific functions that makes this happen. Are you ready? So the first thing we need to do for CSS Grid is we need to tell our CSS that we plan on using grid. So the way we do this, oh gosh, here's a really, really important point that I almost skipped past. So we've talked about parents and children. So the encompassing HTML element, and then the HTML elements that sit inside the parents. That's going to be a big part of how CSS Grid works. Oh, good morning. I skipped saying good morning. Good morning to those of you who are up early. Good afternoon for those of you in similar time zones. And hopefully it's not too terribly late. Jonathan reminding me of my manners. Thank you so much. So we've talked about parents and children. So the larger elements and the child elements they contain. And in CSS Grid, it's really important that we talk about the parent elements as the container, and the child elements are called items. And I bet you absolute money I'm going to mess this up a dozen times today. So if you could just yell at me in the chat every time I mess that up, that would be. Oh, and you know what? Let's get a little bit more light in here while I'm muttering to myself. Oof. How's that for a little bit more light? Everything's fine, and everything's going to continue to be pretty chill. So what we're going to be looking at first is just, and just is always such a scary word. What we're going to do is we're going to set our container class to grid. Container class to grid. All right. We're going to use the display property, and we're going to set the display property to grid. Remember that the properties are the tricks your CSS puppy just sort of knows. So display is a property. CSS knows what to do with display if you give it the right values. And we're going to say grid. And you'll have noticed that this changed nothing. How exciting. We've said, oh, display this as a grid. And it says, yeah, right. I'll display this as a grid. I've applied this conceptual mental model. And then when you start telling me more things, Control Enter. Oh, we're going to run our code with Command Enter. Hey, we're already 5% of the way through. We've already told it. Heck, I still haven't figured out why my browser is acting up. We've told it, hey, we've had this display grid. I'm saying, hey, CSS, I want to use CSS Grid with my CSS. And CSS says, cool, I got that, yeah. And now what we can do is start adding extra code that works with grid. So here we've got an example, grid template columns, 50 pixels and 50 pixels. And this is going to let us set some columns. And the way columns work in CSS Grid is this is going to let us set 2 columns of 50 pixels. Yeah, it's not going to be. It takes the items that are already in that container. It takes the children that already belong to that parent and say, hey, children or items. We've just gotten the instructions. We've already been told that we're using this grid model. And we've just gotten instructions that all of you items, need to be in 2 columns of 50 pixels. Can we do that? Yeah, we can do that. So actually, that is a good example, but that's not what we're doing. What we're doing, grid template column, there's nothing more stressful than trying to type when people can watch you, is there? Grid template columns, we're going to create 3 columns that are 100 pixels wide. How do we think we would do that? So saying 50 pixels and 50 pixels gave us 2 of 50 pixels. I'm reasonably sure that we can say 100 pixels, 100 pixels. Ooh, now we've got 100 pixels to get 3 columns of 100 pixels. I'm moderately confident that, yeah, that's all fine. Everything's chill. And you all are so patient about me having to resize this every time. And the same way we've just learned about columns, we can do the exact same thing to rows. So we've got 3 columns here. Let's go ahead and also add 3 rows. And that's going to feel really similar. Grid, ooh heck, template, rows. And we're going to go ahead and put our semicolon just to stay responsible. And we want 2 of those that are 50 pixels. Here we've got 100 pixels, 100 pixels, 100 pixels for 3 columns of 100. Here, I think I can write 50. Ooh, that didn't do anything. 50. Ooh, it was just the most imperceptible little squidge. We just saw, oh, it grew to 50 pixels. And you know what? Whenever something doesn't look like it changed, yeah, let's give it a bigger number just so we can see that a little bit more dramatically. So we do indeed have 2 rows of 50 pixels. And that feels all right. How about we run our tests? Everything continues to be super chill. This is always a good time to say that Free Code Camp is completely separate from the streaming I do and the Class Central Bootcamp. They're a nonprofit. So you say, oh, wow, I've got an extra $5 a month. Donating to them is a really solid thing to do. But don't y'all dare give away money you don't have. Don't you let me bully you to do that. So all throughout this entire course, and this is exciting because this is the very last streamed class we're going to have together where we have explicit lessons. We're back next week if you want, but all we're going to do next week is take a look at those projects, those scary final projects that you've got to do on your own. But all throughout this course, we've been talking about different units. We know, oh, pixels. Pixels is an absolute unit. And we feel pretty confident about that by now. But we've also got relative units like M. And CSS Grid is giving us some new relative units. So here we've got FR. And FR sets the column or the row to a fraction of the available space. That kind of tracks. Auto says, hey, set the column to the row or width of height as its content. And we'll see what this looks like in action later on. So what this means is, hey, when you size my column or when you size my row, make it fit the item that's inside, make it fit the child. And then percentage, adjust the column or row to the percent width of the container. If I've got a container that's 100 pixels tall and I set something to 10% of the column height, I'll get 10 pixels. Yeah. So we're going to make a grid. So we've already got a grid template columns, and this is the property we're going to use when we're setting the rows and all this. Jonathan's, and whenever you have a question, so how is the JavaScript bootcamp looking? I'm not allowed to, well, I mean, it wouldn't be kind or decent for me to blab other people's news, but I would expect to see an upcoming announcement about, yeah, I'm sort of waffling it. I would expect to see an announcement around future bootcamps coming out soon. I think that we are going to continue to do more things, but you know what? Olga's has got such a good point here. We say, oh, it starts in Jan. I confess that I'm looking to take a little bit of time off for the winter and come back and maybe January, and be able to come back and do that. We're going to be announcing that here on the stream. We'll be announcing that on Free Code Camp. Oh, no, sorry. Gosh. We'll be announcing that on the Class Central website, and we'll also be announcing that in the course forums. Sorry that we haven't gotten that together yet. I promise it'll be soon. Whenever something feels like it's late, it's usually my fault. So we've got grid template columns, and that's going to go ahead and let us set the sizes for our columns, and that's already done. But we're going to get rid of this. So this, when we say grid template columns, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So we've got 5 columns now. We're going to get rid of those temporarily. Ooh, all of our columns are gone. And what we're going to do is we're going to add 3 columns, one of which was just 1 FR. And then we've got one, that is going to be 100 pixels. Ooh, so we've got 2 columns. That's gone ahead and fixed itself. So 1 fraction of the available space plus 100 pixels is, hey, please have this first column take up all of the space except for that 100 pixels. But what happens? What's it going to look like if I have a 2FR here? Yeah. So the column with 1 and 4 looks the same size as 2 and 5. But if we resize this, ready, we'll see that it stretches, while as the one with 2 and 5, which is just 100 pixels, doesn't. So when we make our viewport larger, we see that number 3 is always going to be twice as big, twice as many fractional units as 1 and 4. Oh gosh, I should start drinking coffee in the afternoons. We're going to run our tests. Everything continues to be fine, even though CSS Grid is kind of hard and conceptually weird, right? Oh, sorry, run our tests. Oh, heck. So right now, all of our items, all of our children are squished right up against each other. And I want them to have a little bit more space, don't you? Like, they deserve it. We're going to give them some space using the grid column gap property. And we're going to go ahead and say, what do we want? We want a 20 pixel gap. Immediately, we're seeing that we're getting 20 pixels between each of our columns. Our rows are still kind of squished together, aren't they? Let's see if we can't fix that. Look at that. We're zipping through today. Everything's so chill. I'm going to open this one right back up. And the same way we did grid columns gap, we're to do we're going to do grid row gap now. And we're going to add a gap that's 5 pixels tall. I think we're just going to see a little tiny. It's almost imperceptible. There's just a little tiny boop space in there, letting the gray show through. We're going to keep going. We're 25% of the way done. Everything's so chill. I was going to say I blame, but I credit it to having lovely learners to go through this with. So we've said I can add a column gap and I can add a row gap. But what's this going to look like if I just want to type 1? And I can say, oh, I'll just use grid gap. If grid gap has just 1 value, and let's show you rather than talking it to you. If grid gap has just 1 value, it's going to make all the spaces equal. So if I say 20 pixels, both the rows and the columns both get 20 pixels between them. But if there's 2 values, the first value sets the rows, and the second value, let's make that 40 pixels. We can see the space between the columns is quite a bit bigger. Let's try this again. So it's asking me to set a 10 pixel gap between the rows, a little tiny one, and then a 20 pixel gap between the columns, a little bit bigger. And this is just a fun trick that saves us a little bit of typing. It means we don't have to do grid row gap, grid column gap. We can just say grid gap and our lives are easy. We're going to run our tests. And we're 30% of we're just bopping along. You know what? I also blame credit getting to do this work with the other class yesterday. So I want to talk to you about imaginary stuff in programming because that happens. It is absolutely possible. And sometimes it's absolutely, inescapable that some things in programming are just imaginary. They're just hypothetical. You say, Jess, no, that can't be. Why are you telling me there's imaginary things? I said, well, because we're going to be talking about imaginary lines. And I'm mirrored, so stick with me. If I say right and I go left, have a fuss. So the powerful thing about CSS Grid is we're drawing imaginary grids with columns and with rows. And where we look at our example, where we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, our grid, our imaginary grid isn't very imaginary here. We've got these boxes really, really showing us what's going on. But we're able to set where items begin and end based on these imaginary lines. So for a 3x3 grid, and you can set your grid as large or small as you want, but a 3x3 grid would have 4 lines. The line starting on your right's here, isn't it, for you all? You've got number 1 for the column line starts way over on your left. Wait, is that left? Starts way over on your left. Oop, hang on, I'm well in the sun. Number 2 is going to be the next one over. Number 3, and then number 4. We've got the same thing with rows starting from the top. 1, 2, 3, 4, based on our 3x3 grid. Starlight perfectly and beautifully points out, this is just fancy tables. A lot of stuff we've looked at are just different conceptual tables laid out. And this table, it's a really powerful table. So this probably sounds super weird. And this probably sounds like I'm talking nonsense. So let's go ahead and do a couple of these to see if they stop, not that they stop feeling weird, to see if they feel a little bit less weird. So we want to control the columns an item will consume. And I love to think of it this way. If I say, hey, if I set the grid column, my item is going to stretch out. It's going to eat up all this available space. So if I said grid call, y'all are so gentle, never making fun of my typing. Grid column, if I said 1 to 3, look at this. So it's moved down to the next row, but that's not what we told it to do. We don't care about the rows. It's jumped back down to the next row because what we asked to do is say, hey, can you start at column number 1? And can you go through column number 2? And can you end at column number 3? We want you to take up all the space between column line 1 and column line 3. And that's what's happened here. That we've told it what imaginary lines we want it to sit on, and it's gone ahead and spread out. And if you all can ask any questions you want here, I bet money that it'll just be me saying, it's conceptually weird, isn't it? But here, what we're being asked to do is make it consume the last 2 columns of the grid. So that's not 1 and 3, that's, hang on, heck. Let's look at this. So the last 2 columns of the grid, if we've got a 3x3 grid, and we do, looks like that would start us at 1 and then take us through 4. Does that seem fair? So we're going to start at, nope, I lied. We're going to start at 2 and take us through 4. Let's see if this makes sense when I try it. So we're going to start at 2. Nothing happened because we're not done yet. We're going to run through 4. Yeah, so we've got those imaginary lines. 1, 2, 3, 4. And it's starting at line 2 and running through line 4, which means it's eating up. Oh, if I delete grid template, item 3, item 5, is that true? I'm not doubting you. I'm not doubting you. So Jonathan thinks if I delete grid template, item 5 will define the grid size. And I think that's extremely cool. Hang on. Wait, where's my template? Ooh. So we lose some of the templating, but you are absolutely perfectly right that we can, yeah. So we've told it by default that lines 2 and 4 exist. So I suppose what CSS is doing is saying, hey, you've told me 2 and 4 exist. You haven't told me to mess with anything else. So I'm just going to assume we're on a 3x3 grid. Jonathan, that's fantastic. If it's not me being a bother, how did you know that? Not that it's especially esoteric. I think me not knowing something is not a sign it's super mysterious, but what a fun and cool thing. Are you just terribly good at CSS Grid? I bet you are. We're going to run our tests. We're just zipping along. Things keep being okay, which is really good for a CSS Grid day. Oh, wow. So Jonathan's saying that this is something that he found messing about with Python stuff with tkinter, which I've never heard of before as well. And I confess, hang on, you're going to hear some loud rattling because I'm in my own time. Oh, cool. Oh, cool. Oh, this sounds like, hang on, I'll drop this in for folks who might be interested in. Ooh, where's my mind? I mean, that feels like a question that's really out of scope for any of us. Yeah. So cool Python GUI thing. And this feels this tkinter feels a little bit like Anvil, which I've seen before, which is we're going way, way out of scope. I'm just being mean and weird. I blame Jonathan for being terribly interesting. It's really all his fault. So we're going to control our spacing as well, and we're going to use that with grid row. So we've already done our grid columns. We've already done our grid columns, and it's taking up the last 2 columns. We're going to go ahead and tell it to consume the last 2 rows as well. And I feel like we've probably got the syntax down, right? Grid column did grid set the columns it'll consume. I bet grid row will set the rows it'll consume. With the last 2, so this is still a 3x3 grid. So 1, 2, we're going to start at 2. We're going to go through 3, and we're going to end at 4. Yeah, 2. Oh, I confess I didn't really know if that would work. Everything continues to be fine. And we're about 40% of the way done. We're going to zip through this, and you all are going to go have like delightful afternoons or refreshing mornings. So we learned about justify when we were messing with Flexbox, didn't we? Flexbox? Yes. And we're going to learn about justify self today. And justify self is something we set on a grid item. So we set on one of these children, and we can give it a couple different things. By default, it's going to stretch out and fill the whole space that's been allocated to it. But if you say, hey, and you could specify stretch if you really don't trust that the default will work. You can say, hey, instead of explaining this to you, how about we go ahead and see what all of them look like? So we're going to justify self, and we're going to put our semicolon in just because we're over the top responsible. And what happens? So we've got stretch. And that's the default. So, hey, take up all the room you can in the space you're given. We're already doing that. What is start going to look like? Oh, and someone on Monday asked a really good question. And because I'm mean, I'm going to put the question to you all. When we're looking at start and end and center, what's making this orange box that size? Why is the orange box that specific size? I'm going to show you what center and end look like. If one of you can tell me, I'll be really excited. But if not, I'll chat to you about it myself. That's what start felt like. Whoop. As soon as we take that away, we go back to our default stretch. And we're going to push it all the way to the end. All right, that's chill too. What about center? What do you think that's going to feel like? Yeah, so we've got that squished right in the center. And the reason that this orange box around the number 2 is the size it is because it's automatically sized itself down to, yes, after my own heart, Jonathan. And it's not necessarily just the text. So it's the text in this example, but it's resized itself to match the items it contains. So we've got grids inside of grids, really. We're talking about parents and children or containers and items if we want to stay with the parlance of CSS Grid. But we've got our big grid, the gray box. And then each of these individual boxes are also a container which holds content, which has an item. And we can actually so we've got a grid inside the gray box. If we wanted to, and I bet we will later, we could put a grid inside one of these colored boxes as well, just to get weird. We could put grids all the way down. You can do whatever you want to do with the bounds up, within the bounds of, justify that. We've already done that. We feel good. Within the bounds of accessibility and good common sense. Let's submit and go on to our next challenge. Oh, let's come and grab this. So we're going to align something vertically. We've already learned about justify self to align it horizontally. Align self is going to do the exact same magic, but on a vertical axis. And we've got this. This is going to feel so similar, I bet, isn't it? So align self, semicolon added, just to stay in a good habit. And we're going to align this to the end. And just boom, squish that right down. Again, Jonathan made this fantastic point. It's squished it down, but it's not going to go any smaller than the item it contains. Nice. We can run our tests. Everything's fine. 50% done. Whoop. I mean, except for having to consistently resize that. This is a bit annoying. The same way we learned that we can set multiple values for, oh heck, we did that 5 minutes ago and I forgot what it was. We've already learned that we can set multiple values for the spacing of rows and columns at the same time using grid gap. Hey, there's my brain again. We can also justify multiple different things at the same time. If I say justify items, I mean, hey, parent or container, I want all of your children or items to do the same thing around spacing. So to justify items, we're going to put that in the container. And that's different from what we did last time. Last time what we did is we were putting them within the individual within the rules for the individual containers, the items. And this time we're going to put it in the container that holds them. And what I'm going to do is push center, and it said, hey, every single child you have, every single item within your container, go ahead and center those for me. And it's done it gracefully. Look at this. We are continuing to hustle along. And if you all have any questions as we go, fuss at me, okay? So we're going to align all our items vertically using align items. This is going to feel the exact same as what we just did. So instead of coming into one of our items, we're going to come into the container again because we want to set these rules for all of its children. Align items. We're going to say, hey, oh, well, you know what? I hear this works better if you spell it right. We want to go ahead and move this to the end, so down, for every single one of these. Ooh. So matchstore saying, hey, is it possible to stretch the contents quotes in a container to increase the spaces between letters like this. That's what I get for saying ask me anything. Um, I think it should be able to, but in this case, you would need all of your letters to be different elements. So if it's a single word, you'd probably if it's a single word, I bet you can do this with magic spacing that's just a little bit beyond me. But if they're different elements, um, well, I mean, asking you can't do this with. I think you can probably do this with a single word, but probably not using align items. So yeah, I bet you can do this. I don't know how to do this. If you figure out how to do this for one of your final projects, please come back and I will. I don't even know what to bribe adults with. With kids, I'm always like, and you'll get a sticker. I suppose I can send you a sticker. Oh gosh, we should have some stickers made. So I think you can do that with CSS. I don't know how to do that, which is really exciting, but I don't think align items would do that just because your word is going to be one item. That's going to be one HTML element, assuming it's within a p tag. Whereas here, all of these are separate elements, and that's why that works here. That's an incredibly good question. I love a question where I'm like, yeah, I bet you can. I don't know how. That's a lot of how I answer these questions, isn't it? We're going to come and drag this lazy bones back, and we are going to learn about templating. Templating is so weird to me. So weird. So weird. So really, oh, cool. You know what? People got me. So Jonathan's like, oh, maybe we could do this with spans. And Mosera's like, I got you. I got you. There's a letter spacing property. Is there a letter spacing property? I'm not doubting you at all. I'm just getting it to throw it in the chat. Look at that. Do you know what? I've doubted you exactly once, and I will never do it again. I'd like to go on record that Moser is absolutely perfectly right. And here's the MDN for letter spacing. Yeah. Oh gosh, and don't ever worry about derailing me. You've listened to me. I'm a goofball. I go off on tangents all the time. So, templating is so conceptually weird to me because you're setting a template. You're setting what's going to be in different spaces of this website. And you're doing it just by saying header, 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 content, content, footer, footer. You're just saying, hey, I'm putting these words in the order that I want this content to exist in. And right now you're saying, hopefully, rightly saying, Jess, what the heck are you talking about? And I say, I got you, I got you. So, and it's still conceptual. We're gonna work with this a little bit more, and it'll feel it has the potential to feel a little bit less weird in a second. But here, when we've said header, we mean, hey, if you've got content in the space up in the top left-hand corner, that grid area will be the item within that is going to be a part of our header. And the second header. So, hey, we think this is a 3x3 grid because we've got 3 words by 3 words. And we think the second one in the second item in that cubby, like think of them as cubby holes, these grids. We think that's going to be a header as well. So that's number 2 we think is a header. Number 3 is a header. Number 4, we think that's going to be advertisement. It's the way the web runs a lot. Number 5, we think that's going to be content. And we don't have any items in these other boxes yet. But this is me saying both to myself and to other developers and to CSS. So we're communicating a lot with this template. We're saying, hey, I think we're going to have a number 6. I think number 6 is going to exist. And I think that's going to be content as well. You say, furthermore, if you go down one row, we think there's going to be a number 7 below this number 4, and that's going to be an advert. And then we've got footer in these last 2 rows. That could be an 8 and 9, which are 2 different elements, or it could be 1, 8, which takes up both. Matchstore, I see you've got a question about tribute pages. I'll save that one to the end just to be keep my brain together. So we're going to change this and get rid of this last advert. So we're just going to say, hey, everything on the bottom row is footers. And you'll notice that absolutely nothing changed. And yeah, that's fine. We're going to go ahead in a second and learn a little bit more about this. This is just to get sort of our brains gently touching. Ooh, I don't want our brain to touch anything. It's about letting our brains first encounter this idea of really creating a template by speaking it into reality. And I think it's magic, isn't it? That's sort of the core of what magic is. We are so quick through this. You all fuss at me if I'm going too fast. So we're going to put items in grid areas by using the grid area property. So what we just learned about, let's take a deep breath. Whew. We learned about these grid template areas. We say header, advert, content, footer. But that hasn't really changed anything yet. What I want to do is I'm going to go into some of our items and I'm going to tell them who they are. I'm going to tell them if they're a header or a footer or an advert. And let's see what happens with that. So item 5 is going to be a footer. Ooh, this will give me a chance to have a little bit of a drink. It's water. That makes me sound like I'm having a very heavy partying Tuesday. But what do you think will happen when I set the grid area of 5 to footer? I think something will change. What'll that look like? Ooh, Are header, advert, and footer predefined, or can any name be there? Let's get weird. So let's check and see. Let's get a nonsense word in here. Cookie. Wait, no, that's still a computer thing, isn't it? Duck. Let's check. So instead of setting item 5 to footer, let's go ahead and set our grid area to duck. Hey! So, while they may be predefined, CSS knows what a header is and a footer. I don't know about advert. It looks like that we can indeed put really anything. Why? Ooh, I'm going to be meaner because I answered my own question about what would change. Why would we say header and footer and content and advert instead of putting cool, weird names? Why might we decide to be boring? I'm going to put these footers back because that just jumped around. Our columns changed. So Yanabe is saying, well, it's semantic. It carries meaning. And I love this. So semantic meaning, and when we talk about semantic HTML, we're often talking about carrying meaning through our browser. But here, this is still about semantics. This is about carrying meaning for ourselves in the future or for other users. I love this. So really, yes, we don't confuse it with classes or IDs. Also real solid answers. These are all correct. But I think I'm going to use the phrase human readability again. Just because, you know what? If I'm a person and I see grid area duck, I'm like, what? Whereas if I say, hey, grid area footer, cool. You know what? I'm a web developer. I know what a footer is. Yeah, I got that. I love how many different correct answers you all are consistently throwing up. Oh, we are almost 70% of the way done. Everything, and if we finish early today, you're going to have to double your homework of having a lovely time. With the extra time, y'all can, well, hopefully, even while you're watching the streams, y'all can grab some tea and relax. What if we want to create a grid area without making a template? And we've got a little shortcut for this. So item 1, we've learned about this, grid area, blah, blah, blah. And this is going to be a way to, as Jonathan so helpfully pointed out earlier, this is going to be a way for us to define the grid using the items, not using the container they exist within. And I think that was so prescient, so forward thinking of you, Jonathan, to say, hey, don't forget that. We can set our grid anytime we give it, anytime we give CSS explicit instructions about what the grid looks like. So in the let's just copy this. We're setting the grid area to 1124. And here what we've said, well, let's go ahead and get this as well, because this is going to show us what these numbers mean and why this happened. Oh, heck. I'm going to comment this out. Oh, heck. Comment that out. I'm going to comment that out. There we are. So our number 1 here is telling us which horizontal line to start at. So we're going to start way up at the top, horizontal line 1. And then the second number we've got here, the second number 1, is talking about which vertical line we want to start at. And we're starting at number 1 as well. So that means we're starting all the way in this left-hand corner because we're starting at 1 and 1, both of those imaginary lines. And then this third number is telling us where to end our horizontal line. So we're coming from 1 and we're ending that at 2. We're just going to take up 1 column. But this last number is telling us where to end the vertical line. And we're saying, hey, you know what? I want you to start at 1, but I want you to keep going all the way to 4. I want you to take up all 3 of these columns. And Jonathan pointed out that we can do weird stuff here, can't we? If I said 5 here, we've got a new column. We're changing our imaginary grid as we go. Isn't this weird? Isn't it fantastic? I mean, weird and fantastic are usually the same thing, aren't they? So we're going to have to do some math here. So we want item 5 between the 3rd and 4th horizontal line. And what we're going to do is we're going to change this. Horizontal start, vertical start, horizontal end, and vertical end. And look, that doesn't do anything. That's not real code. Our number 5 is just sitting in the corner freaking out. Number 5 is like, look, you've told me that I need to be in a specific grid area. You've given me no, you didn't even put your semicolon. You've given me nonsense for my instructions. I'm just going to go sit sort of outside. I'm going to go sit in the corner until you give me some suggestions that aren't rubbish. But I did this because this gives us a really easy, as easy as grid gets. Ooh, matchstore, look at you. Always jumping ahead conceptually. Can we make it responsive? Yes, yes, yes. We will absolutely do this. You're always so helpful, like just easily the best questions. So horizontally, the 3rd and 4th horizontal line. So we start, H start is on 3 and H end is 4. But like, look at that. Number 5 is still sitting in the corner. Like, look, I understand you want me to start on 3 horizontally and end at 4 horizontally, but you've given me nonsense for the vertical. So right? I love this too. Whenever CSS grid items get instructions that don't make sense, they're just like, absolutely not. I do not get paid enough for this. I'm just going to go. I'm just going to go. And them sitting in the corner is really useful as well because it lets you know something's gone pretty wrong pretty quickly. But I love the whole deal of, look, I don't get paid enough to do this. You give me proper instructions or I'm just going to go have a timeout. And then we want to be between the 1st and 4th vertical. Whoa, that's going to be nice and big, isn't it? So we're going to come in and our vertical start is 1 and our vertical end is going to be, ooh, look how vertical end is going to be 4. Yeah. Oh, wait. Hang on. Third and 4th horizontal lines. 1st and 4th. Yeah. Okay. This looks like this is right. You want to run our tests and see? Everything continues to be mostly fine. The world outside is still chaotic and challenging and weird, and we don't have a lot of control over the whole big world. But so far, for just today's session, CSS has been behaving really well. But now we're going to learn about functions. And functions are really useful. Functions are going to feel a little bit like what messing with JavaScript is going to feel like. Ooh. Because functions do things, they transform. And here, what we're going to do is we're going to create a repeat function. So here, well, let's talk about why we might use a repeat function. So far our grid has been 3 by 3, and that's really chill. But what if I want a grid, and here our example is, what if I want a grid that's 100 rows that are the same height? I don't want to go 100, like 10 pixels, 10 pixels. I don't want to do that. No, I don't want to do that at all. Beautiful matchstore after my own heart saying, functions are here to automate our tedious, repetitive tasks. Let's do that. Let's automate this baby. So here's how we would make a 100-row grid, each row being 50 pixels tall. Well, that hasn't changed anything. This is going to be really confused between grid template rows twice. Let's go ahead and do this properly like it asked. Use repeat to remove repetition in grid template columns. So we've got 1FR, 1FR, 1FR. We're going to kill it. I mean, we're not actually going to kill anything, but we're going to put repeat. And then we've got these smooth parentheses. And these smooth parentheses, these smooth parentheses, that's how we speak English. Everything's chill. Are going to let us know that we're working with a function. So instead of saying 1FR, 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 I'm going to say, hey, I want you to repeat this 3 times. And I get a comma. And I want each of these 3 to be 1FR. It doesn't have to be 3. I want you to repeat this 5 times. Ooh. I want you to repeat this 7 times. Well, I've only got 5 items, but I'm gonna make a grid, even though I don't have the items for these. And this is a really quick, really chill way to squish your grid around without doing tons of typing. In this particular example, this is just about as much typing as 1FR, 1FR. But let's imagine in a world where we were really doing 100 or 1,000 or a bazillion. That'd be a pain. We're not going to do that. Way 77% of the way done. Oh, heck. So I'm reasonably sure that minmax is also a term from like role-playing games or video games. But we can, and this is a little bit of what matchstore was asking about. We're like, hey, can we do weird stuff with resizing? But you were specifically asking, can we add or remove columns based on size? And we'll get there. We'll answer your specific question. Here, I'm saying, hey, I know that my users are going to have a whole bunch of different viewports. They're going to use maybe a phone sometimes to access it. They're going to maybe use a great big browser monitor on the biggest possible. Maybe they're looking at my website on a big screen TV as a monitor, which I think would be terribly distracting. But I want to set some rules to say, hey, this is the minimum. This is the smallest you can make this, or this is the biggest you can make this item. And this is a function as well. So we're seeing grid template call. Let's go ahead and copy. Nope. Minmax function. Replace the 1F. Ooh. You know what? This tripped me up yesterday. So a function, and let's talk a little bit about that. Hang on. Let's get weird for a second. And this doesn't do anything. A function is going to be the name of the function, and then the smooth brackets in CSS. We can do different things. And then we've got our parameters. Really the value. And these terms, function and parameters, we're going to see those again and again in JavaScript. They're going to look a little different, but conceptually, this is really what's going on. So here we're saying a function. And when I say the name of a function, when I tell CSS, hey, repeat, I'm saying, hey, what I want you to do is this. So function is really what I want. You know what? That looks rubbish. That's so hard to read. We know that function is what I want. And then parameters are, here are the values, here are the scores of what I want you to do. And sometimes to make things deeply chaotic, you can put them inside each other. I say, hey, I want you to repeat. But our values for that repeat are going to be a function themselves. And I'm going to comment this out. Did that make any sense? Because that sounded like nonsense to me. So yeah, a function, first you say what the function is. Here's what I want you to do. And then you give it the parameters. But sometimes those parameters can be another function. So here, I'm going to say, hey, I want you to repeat this. But I want to set min-max as the size. So here we've got 90 pixels. And with our values here, with our values inside of a function, we do add commas. And this trips me up a little bit. So if I just said grid template columns, 10 pixels, 10 pixels, 10, there's no columns there. But here, we do indeed. Let's see. Oh, does that work? Is that? We're going to resize this and see if this worked. Actually, I'm going to run our tests. Oh, yes, of course. That's what got me. We still need to say it's 3 columns. Thank you. But the value of, I knew I was doing something wrong. So here, our function is repeat. Our parameters are 3. So I want you to repeat this 3 times. And then our parameters for size are another function. Yeah, weird. And now when I resize this, it looks like it's not going to get smaller than 90 pixels. It'll just push it off the screen. But if I open it up, it'll stretch as long as I want because the maximum is 1 fraction, 1 share of the space. Isn't that weird? Let's look at this a little bit more. Matchstore, can you expand on this question a little bit? So it applies to contents. If you're in our last example, because we used the function in the container, in the parent that holds these items and the parent that holds these children, in that case, it did. But we could go ahead and set min-max on an individual item, and that wouldn't be sort of content-based. We could say, hey, item 2, we want you and only you to be a minimum this size and maximum this size. And we've got that power. Yeah. I hope that was the question you were trying to ask. Well, I mean, the question you were asking. I'm not trying to blame you for me wobbling an answer. Oh, hang on just a second. Let me resize this. So the question here is, could we make it so that instead of going off the screen, you go under when you make the window smaller? What do you? Oh, so that all the containers are still. Oh, so like a deck of cards overlapping. Yes, but I don't know how. I've seen it before. I've definitely seen it before, but I don't know how. You love how often that answer comes up to be like, yeah, I think so. Oh, no, cool. Not overlapping, just going into the second or third row. Yes, I do know the answer to this. And we're going to get to this in a lesson or 2. Yeah. So we can change the size of the rows and columns based on the size of the viewport. We got you. We can do that. Everything's fine. Let's create flexible layouts using autofill. Autofill lives in the repeat function. And that means, hey, babe. I assume that we can call CSS babe. They'll say, hey, babe, how you doing? You having a nice day? I want you to repeat, but instead of giving it this first, instead of saying 3 or 5 or 100 or 1,000,000 in our repeat, we're saying repeat, and then that value is the autofill function. And the autofill function is just saying, hey, go ahead and give me however many rows or however many columns as you can fit in here based on the size of the items available. And this means when the container changes size, it'll just keep inserting new columns or new rows if they're going to fit. This is going to be weird. This is going to be weird. So why am I sorry? I get so excited when the answer is weird. Autofill. And now this is this is so chaotic. We have a function. So repeat is a function. And then our parameters for that function are two more functions. Autofill doesn't take any parameters. It doesn't take any values. You say autofill, it says, yeah, I know what I'm doing. I'm going to fill it up all the way. But minmax, we've got our values inside it. Yeah, this is so confusing. And this is so weird, right? And I'm so sorry that I'm chuckling. I just spend so much time confused by CSS Grid that it's lovely to be troubling a whole new generation of web developers. I promise, in so much as I can promise anything, that these ideas of functions and parameters and a function taking a function as a parameter, that will make so much, well, I mean, ha ha ha, that's mean. When you first start doing JavaScript, you're going to get more of this and it's going to suck. But very soon, this kind of stuff is going to click, I promise. I know I keep telling you the web development version of it'll be easier when you get older, or you'll understand when you get older. But the more you mess with functions, the more they sort of make sense. Yeah, let's come on in. We saw autofill. And now check this out. So here we've got these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the bottom row. These aren't going to change. We've got two different containers. And this one doesn't have our weird autofill thing going on. So if we stretch this out, look at that. We're automatically getting new columns, new invisible columns that we can't see across the top. But instead, these bottom ones, they've all been told to be 1FR, so they're just stretching out. They're not getting those extra columns applied. Oh, and look, if we squish them, we get fewer. Sorry, that's going to make you very dizzy. I know this doesn't make any sense yet, and it's going to feel easier and easier the more you touch it. As much as I'm rubbish at CSS Grid, it's an incredibly powerful model. So we're also going to use autofit. Autofit, you say, oh, we just learned this. And I say, well, I mean, it's a little different, but not that different. Autofit is almost the exact same as autofill, but when autofill adds empty row and columns and pushes items to the side, autofit collapses empty rows and columns and then stretches your items to fit the size of the container. So autofit is like a fancier autofill. Let's try this. Which one? Yeah. So we've got autofill up here. And let's set autofit just to see the difference. Oop. Oop, we already saw it jump to fit this way. So here, we're seeing that there are new columns being built here. And here we're saying, well, we're still building new columns, but we're going to stretch you out over multiple columns to make this content to sit a little better. We've got a question. So functions and nesting are okay. The confusion seems to be from containers and contents. Oh, and what applies when positioning on the screen and then making it responsive when narrowing down window size? I'm so sorry. I don't have a quick and easy way to say, aha, the way, like I'm going to say these 3 words and I'll just, yeah. So do we mind sort of visualizing what would be the contents as an example in this case, instead of these numbers? So this gets a little challenging because the contents here are these numbers. So hang on. Oh, heck, is there an easy way for me to change this? And these are the exact same things going on, except check out how autofit. Oh, so I'm sorry. Yeah, you're asking yeah, you wanna see more sort of real world examples of these stretchy do's. I got you. I keep telling you, I promise we'll do this in a second, but I promise we're gonna get to some ones that look a little bit more realistic. Yeah, I promise. I think it might be the next one or the one we'll get to ones that look more realistic before we're done. And you what? We're 91% of the way done, so I think might be this next one. Ooh, heck, come yes. All right. And I love that question. Hey, can I have something more realistic? Have something more realistic. This is what a website might look like, right? So your header, and that would have the title of the web page or whatever, your advert, and that would say, hey, buy this fancy soda. The content would be your article, maybe an article about how snakes are actually very, very cool. These are all hypotheticals you can write an article about. And the footer could say, copyright Jess, who thinks snakes are cool. And we're going to go ahead and use a media query to make this layout responsive. And what we're doing here is saying, hey, if my viewport width is 300 pixels or more, it's going to change the number of columns from 1 to 2. Just as an example. But what we are going to do here is we're going to come down, we're going to say, hey, where's our media query? And we remember those from last time, that they've got these little @ signs in front of them. They're weirdos, aren't they? But here we're going to say, when our viewport, when our width is bigger than 400 pixels, I want you to completely I want the header to take up the whole top row, and I want the footer to take up the whole bottom row when my user's viewport is big enough. So say, hey, we've already got this grid area. Say, if it's 300 pixels or bigger, set it up like this. Advert header. Okay. Advert header. And the advert comes down here. Advert content. We've got advert footer. We say, you know what? To make this really responsive, if my user has more space, and we can shrink the advert and still meet our requirements from the advert company, I want you to go ahead and change it so the header takes up the whole space. And you say, well, that hasn't changed yet. And I say, well, hang on, be cool. I want the footer to change that and take up that whole space as well. So now, hey, as soon as I get wider than 100 pixels, we're seeing that jump out responsively and say, hey, I've told CSS that when you have this kind of space, I want you to change the layout. And this is kind of an example of the conceptual wiggling, the sort of responsive squishiness that grid is really good for. Is this a little bit better of an example of when you might use these wraps and media queries? I think those might be our last one. And I'm so sorry. Oh, heck, that the only way this is really going to stick and make sense is so cruel. Does anybody else want to give the advice I'm going to give? So what is the only way to make this make more sense in your head and straighten it out is it's just to do it until it feels less weird. Yeah. Yeah. That's such a good point. Castlor is making such a good point. We say, hey, this looks a lot like our technical documentation project. It does. If you haven't started our technical documentation project yet, I might bookmark this one. Catherine, after my own heart, is like, practice. And practice is absolutely the way to do it. Yeah. The only way this is going to feel less weird is just messing with it until your brain has had a lot of chances to touch it. Yeah. What we're going to do now is we're going to put a grid within a grid. This is the piece de resistance. I've been promising this where I said, well, you know, I bet we could put a grid. I don't know why I'm doing a voice for me. I said, well, you know, we could put a grid inside a grid, and let's put a grid inside a grid. So who can remember the very first lesson What did we tell? What did we use to tell our container that this was a grid? Yeah, you can see it on the page. So what property did we set in our very first lesson to say, hey, container, I want you to be a grid. And while I'm giving y'all a chance to answer that, matchstore is saying, wait, grid can be just as responsive as Flexbox. And yes, it's a bit more modern. A lot of folks are saying, oh, well, move away from Flexbox, but you can do what's in your heart. Matchstore, perfect display. Jonathan, perfect display. We are going to make this little blue box because we've got our gray box, our conceptual gray box as a grid, which all of our content is sitting on. And now we're going to make our blue box a grid as well, just to get weird. And we're going to do that by setting the display property to grid. We got this. So item three is our pale turquoise. Sorry, not blue. So we say display. You're a grid now. Woof, you're a grid now. Let's go ahead and what did we use to set our columns? Remember that we set a grid template, and there were those two different ways to template things out, weren't there? We could say header, 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 footer, footer, footer. Or we could set a grid template like this. And we want it to be a grid template of auto with 1 FR. Is that right? Oh, wait. We don't put the comma there, do we? That's only for functions. What do you think? We run our tests and we think we've got this because we got a pretty responsive grid here. That feels we got a grid and then we got a grid in our grid. Do we feel done with grids? Please tell me. Grid template columns. It does have. Oh yes, I'm rubbish. There we are. We actually have our columns set. I was so focused on the code, I didn't even see that wasn't updating. Further proof that you should never listen to me. Olga, absolutely. You are such an absolute sweetheart to say, hey, it's grid template column. You are an absolute gift for saving me from myself. Make sure you get credit for being so helpful. I think that we've done grids. We've done grids and grids. And if you wanted to, you could put a grid in a grid in a grid. You could make this paragraph 1 a grid. I cannot stop you from making as many grids as you want, but keep in mind that we want to make sure that we're sort of balancing this as well. I think we're going to push Control Command, and we are done. We're done with CSS grids. We're fine. Everything's fine. So, because I'm mean, we've already talked about donation this lesson. So sorry. Oh, so here I'm going to, if you have any questions at all, and matchstore has a really good one. Say, hey, we're talking about our tribute page. Gotcha. Yes, this earlier. Would I put the page title in the header element or not really? Let's look at our, so usually you would, right? For a normal website, you absolutely would. But here, my tribute page should have an element with the corresponding ID of main, which contains all other elements. I mean, all other elements feels pretty final. It sounds like, because title is an element. It sounds like your title element, probably an H1. I'm not, but I'm not a cop. It sounds like your title element with this ID of title. I mean, it says it should exist within main. Yeah. I mean, yeah, you make a good point. So yeah, don't put your header inside a main. That's just going to feel weird. I think you might just leave a header off for this project just until you get it checked and you get your good job check after you can go back and do it proper, right? I think this is really designed for folks being able to do this tribute page project before we got to the place in HTML where we learned about headers. You're just ahead of the class. I mean, you were, yeah. Well, we've caught up now. Yeah, it feels a little unnatural, but that's the nature of abstraction and learning, isn't it? That sometimes you're like, well, this isn't the way we would do it, but do your homework like this because it'll be a little bit more approachable. Homework. Homework. I bet money that you all can guess. I mean, I bet real imaginary internet money that you can guess what your homework is. So there are no more lessons you have to do. If you finished your template, your tribute page, amazing. Go on to the next one. So your your homework is to get through as much of these projects, as much of the project as you can on your own. And we're gonna have so next session is just gonna be a question and answer. Our last session is just gonna be like, hey, yeah, let's go ahead and look at this in the context of just our projects. Oh, Linda, we are gonna be meeting at the same time. Do you know what occurs to me? If some of us are Linda, you're not in Europe, are you? One thing that is very, very frustrating is both as a programmer and as a human being is time zones. And the clocks change in the United Kingdom before they change in North America, I think. So I think Europe has already changed our times, but it's weird for y'all in who are not in Europe. What if, hypothetically, if we did another one of these in Jan, what if we tried to when do the clocks change back? 2022. Try to promise something I can't do. Daylight savings time. March. Fabulous. Yeah. Olga's got the same question. Did we recently change time? I'm so sorry that this is an artifact of the United Kingdom doing daylight savings time. If you're someplace where you don't do daylight savings time, or if your time didn't change on October, it's just that Europe is weird with time zones. So we lost an hour on Halloween. Lost, gained. We changed our times. Yeah, Catherine's got it like we changed our time Sunday. And to make it even more confusing, like a lot of folks who have daylight savings time, you all would change in a couple weeks. So deeply chaotic. Time zones were a mistake. Daylight savings time is an abomination. And I'm sorry that it's confusing. So, how about, oh, so use a double-sized retina image. So yes, this is something we learned about. You can double size your retina image for higher resolution displays. What's my opinion about this to download? So it can be a little bit more data intensive for folks. I prefer to optimize for folks on lower spec hardware personally. And like, because if you've got a fancy retina screen, your life is pretty easy already. Whereas, oh hey, if you're on a limited bandwidth, I'd prefer to cater to you. So far as its implications on SEO, I know you all hear me say this consistently, but I have genuinely no idea. SEO changes all the time and what people recommend. You know, the Google SEO folks are on like Twitter and all that. We'll be announcing in details about the JavaScript bootcamp soon. Yeah. I don't have the information quite yet. We'll get it real soon, I promise. I know it's so frustrating where I'm like, ooh, and I've not been subtle where I'm like, yeah, probably doing a thing, maybe January, you know. If you want to hang out in the meantime, I want some JavaScript right now, and you don't mind somebody being absolutely terrible, I'll probably be streaming JavaScript just on my Twitch, just as me, not as part of the boot camp. Actually, let me give y'all the Twitch. I'm briefly be able to hear myself. It's gonna be terrible. Oh, it's the worst. It's brutal. Ugh, I hate this. But yep, I am going to be doing some of this, just informally streaming these lessons on Twitch. Yeah, it's not part of the proper boot camp, so that's just going to be me as a goofball. Yeah. Um, so the times for the informal streams will be the exact same times I'm doing now, I think. Does that seems fine? But I'll probably go double speed. So I'll probably do some of them in the morning and some of them in the afternoon. Ooh, so here's a really good question. What about Pomodoro technique in future lessons? So, um, sh- should there be another boot camp in January? There's going to be a slightly different format. So the 2-hour sessions are really long. we're going to go ahead and take a look at doing those in a relatively different format so that you don't have that big, long woomph of lesson time. Not quite Pomodoro, even though that's the right way to learn. But yeah. And matchstore 10 a.m. Monday, 9 p.m. Tuesday. I have no idea what time zone you're in, so I'm going to say maybe. So the times I've already been doing them. Sorry, that's not very helpful. But that's just going to be me doing it as a goofball, not as part of the boot camp. There will be an announcement about what the boot camp's doing around JavaScript, and if you wait for that, spoilers, I'm reasonably sure you'll get better JavaScript instruction than you could get with my goofy self. Another question: what are we going to talk about on the next stream? So I won't cry about how much I'm going to miss y'all. But what we're going to be doing is just doing a really laid back question and answer, sort of generally, and doing a little bit of sort of, hey, how might we break down these different projects? So we're just going to be looking at we're going to be looking at the final projects that you all are going to be doing on your own, and we're going to be answering questions and doing a little bit of live coding to show off, just so that you don't feel so alone when we cast you off into the seas to do those big scary final projects on yourself. Fabulous. If there are no other questions. Yep. So when we're ready to, so this is a good point. So we might want to check our emails, the forum and Discord. Oh, I don't know about the Discord. So if there's a Discord, it's unofficial. Sorry. But so when future bootcamp news is announced, it'll be email and email on the Class Central website and in the forums as well. So when I'm informally screaming some JavaScript, I won't be covering the same topic Mondays and Tuesdays. I'm so sorry. Just because it's me doing it just to refresh my terrible JavaScript skills for should I need them in the future. Fabulous. And do you know what? I might go ahead and stream me doing some of the challenges, me doing some of these final projects as well, just to goof about. Fabulous. Everything's chill. I absolutely adore the opportunity to get to learn with you all. You all ask amazing questions. You're so, so helpful. And I will see you next week for the last time for this. So Olga's asking such a good question. Do we have to share our projects anywhere except Free Code Camp? You absolutely don't. So once you put them on Free Code Camp, you need to make your profile visible. But then Free Code Camp is going to automatically give you a certification. You don't have to, I mean, you can show me and you can show us on the forums and I'll make a big fuss, but you don't have to. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be so, so satisfying to get that certification, isn't it? I'm going to go ahead and let you all go. Oh, don't forget your homework. Have the easiest rest of the day if it's morning or afternoon. If it's nighttime for you, you have to have a relaxing day all day tomorrow. You have to be as gentle to yourself as you can. And do as much work on these projects as you can as well. I absolutely delight in the time we've gotten to spend together. And I hope you have an easy afternoon or morning or middle of the night. Bye, all.